What's up, outliers? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be breaking down a athlete that is a little bit different than our norm, but something that I think is really good for us to look at and kind of analyze whether or not you're into this sport. So today we're going to be looking at Janja Garnbret. So Janja is the most successful competition rock climber that is out there. Two phenomenal performances in the first two showings of rock climbing in the Olympics, but also she's just super dominant when it comes to rock climbing. So I thought it'd be a really good one to look at and kind of analyze a little bit of what they're doing in the video and what her training kind of looks like. And, big thank you to Natasha Ocean. She's the one that actually went and did the workout with her for this video. So the video I'm watching does include Natasha in it, but I'm not going to be breaking down what she's doing. We're just going to be looking at Janja. So the biggest thing to kind of like break this off is rock climbing is something that I have done for about 5 years. It's not something I'm like majorly like high level skilled at. I climb about a, you know, 512 minus in the gym on top rope to be specific. But if I'm on lead in the gym, I'm 11s. And if I'm on lead or doing sport climb outdoors, I'm doing 10 if I'm lucky at 510. Bouldering, V5, V6 maybe. So my level of climbing is not going to be anything close to Janja. She is absolutely incredible. But, I have a good taste for rock climbing and the feelings and kind of the muscles that are used during it. So I'm going to take basically my experience of rock climbing and tie it with my knowledge of the body. So, being an exercise scientist and strength and conditioning coach. So I'm going to kind of blend these two things together, even though I'm not a, professional whatsoever at rock climbing. But we're going to take that physiology, we're going to take the biomechanics, and we're going to kind of mesh it together. So in the video, they start talking about how about 95% of Janja's training is essentially done on the rock wall, which that's her sport specific activity. Makes a lot of sense that, a lot of her training would occur actually on the wall. She says that she does about 6 days a week of climbing. She said like 3 days on, 1 day off, 3 days on. That's a lot of volume of anything. Doesn't matter what it is, if it's running, cycling, rock climbing. That's just a ton of volume. So, tip of the cap to her to be able to withstand that volume. That's a very unique, we can call it a superhuman thing to be able to do that and also recover, because I think she said her climbing sessions could be like up to 4 hours. But this is a full-time job for a professional athlete. So many professional athletes are at the end of the day putting in 3 to 4 hours. It might not just be specifically to like the sport itself, but it might be with warm-ups, with corrective therapies, with any sort of modality for recovery and stuff like that. But it's a full-time job. I even recall back to when I was in college and I was running track and field. I'd go into our field house, an hour and a half ahead of practice. I would go into the athletic training room, do a bunch of different stuff. Then I would go to practice. Practice would last roughly an hour. Sprinting practice is pretty short usually. You can only sprint so much and keep it actually beneficial. Meanwhile, afterwards, I would go back into the athletic training room and do a bunch of different things to help with that recovery. So in total, looking at 4 hours of my day as a student athlete. So, mix that in with everything else. It does become kind of a full-time job. So with going and climbing for 4 hours, I don't think she's directly just climbing all that time. I think there's a lot more that goes into it, skill work and stuff like that, which when they do get into the climbing stuff later in the video, they're talking about working on things that, are her weaknesses on the wall to help with it. So definitely some value in that. And, getting into more of like what I'd say, they're calling the physio work because European like to refer to training as physio. So getting into the training, pretty simple, easy warm up. They do like 5 minutes of cardiovascular warm up. So rower and cycle. It's pretty standard low and slow just to kind of elevate body temperature and also get, muscles moving and stuff like that. So nothing too specific there. I have to imagine that there's some stuff that we're not seeing in the video though, because they kind of jump straight into a exercise right from there. So I have to imagine that away from the cycle, there were other things that were maybe done to help prep for that first exercise. And we're just not seeing it, whether it's just not that fun to put into a video, or maybe they're a little bit more scrapped on time, so they're making everything shorter because they're doing kind of like a featured video. So who knows? I would make sure that before getting into a first exercise of anything, no matter what the training is that, yeah, a little bit of cardio is great, kind of spin on a bike, loosen up a little bit, get your body temperature up, but then go into actual like warm up exercises, dynamic stretching and stuff like that to help prep the body for whatever the, exercise routine is that's going to be there. So if that wasn't there, I don't know. If it was there, once again, I don't know, but I would definitely highly recommend that there be something. Now, second to that, they do go into the first exercise, which is kind of an interesting thing because her physio coach, trainer, whatever we want to call them, basically is like, we're going to work on balance, proprioception, and reaction drills, which like, okay, yeah, balance, very valid for rock climbing. You're standing on little ledges and you need to be able to, balance on those things and also be able to place your like weight properly. Proprioception work is going to basically like know your body in space. Super helpful. I just went over a bunch of like stretching stuff on the podcast, which kind of talked about like our proprioceptors being our muscle spindles and our Golgi tendon organs. Those kind of react together and also help to basically give us perception of space. So if you need more information on that, go listen to Performance Bites on the podcast. But right now, we'll jump back into this exercise that they're doing. It's a very interesting lateral movement exercise. So double banded, they put a band above the knees. So we're just talking about little mini bands, one band above the knees and then one band more like at the shin level. And what they're doing is essentially walking laterally. So we'd get like, we can call those lateral walks or something of the sort, but they're also using an overhead resistance. That's a lateral overhead resistance. So it's not like a weight that is bearing downwards with gravity. It's a lateral resistance. So that piece of equipment is variable on the resistance that it gives, which is a neat tool, but that's not really something that's like standard in a gym. I've never seen it at a gym. It's probably a very specific piece of equipment that costs a good penny to do. Pretty much that tool's not going to be something that you're going to like go to your rock climbing gym, go to your box gym and find. So what it was doing essentially was that variable resistance. So when you became comfortable with pulling with a certain amount of, oomph, it would change to lighter, heavier, then you'd have to adjust, which, there's definitely benefit to stuff like that where you're training your body to be reactive and know that like life isn't perfect, like, and also things that we experience in sport aren't always going to be like this perfectly balanced barbell with 45 pounds on each side. But it's kind of a hard tool to like measure growth with. Like you can keep like changing that like weight and variability, or you can add time or duration as your measurement. But it's still kind of an interesting thing and maybe not a great example for us like normies to be like, oh yeah, that would be a good tool for me to use for training. Though you could, like take one of the bars, hook it up to a cable machine and kind of facilitate a similar exercise, but you're not going to get variability with it. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Lateral training for any sport, I think, is really good, even if it's a sport that you're mainly actually going in your sagittal forward plane. I think that if we move left and right, we're training muscles that still need a lot of attention, so we don't want to neglect those. because the quads and the hamstrings get a lot of work, but things like your adductors, abductors, internal rotators, external rotators, talking about the hips, talking about the shoulders, don't really get as much attention as like the big guns. So definitely changing up the plane of motion is a great way to enhance your sports performance, no matter what the sport is. But in climbing, that is a lot of climbing with that lateral movement, whether you're flagging a leg out, reaching up out. It's never just like a perfect in front of you. So if you can have more strength laterally and more coordination laterally, it's obviously a great thing. They're choosing to do it in I would say like a little bit more of like a fancy way, but even things as simple as, lateral lunges or, Cossack squats, are going to be really good for the legs. And then anything that you can do with your shoulders that isn't just like, pressing up and down or pulling inwards, and you're actually extending that lever out and away from you, I think is a really good tool to strengthen like muscles like that. So for us normies, there's something that you can do. The next thing that they kind of went into was hangboard training, which if you haven't done hangboarding before, it's basically like an artificial rock climbing tool that goes on the wall, has a bunch of different, crimp holds and slopers and stuff like that that you can grab onto to train your grip. But they weren't just training grip, they actually were using that same device that they use for the overhead walk with that resistance, and they hook that resistance up to the waist. So as the hanging is occurring, it's giving variable resistance, which really good core coordination, and probably training the muscles a little bit differently, especially because resistance coming at the hips, left and right, isn't really like a packable thing. Like it's just kind of different. You're not going to experience that in sport generally, because gravity is the only thing usually pulling you, which is downwards, especially in climbing. Doesn't mean there's not value to it. It's probably strengthening your grip, probably strengthening your shoulders. Once again, going back to like those proprioceptors and stuff like that. But still a very interesting thing, because hard to mimic for us, normal people in climbing. But you could have a friend, grab a band, wrap it around you, and pull on you funky while you're trying to do climbs. So mean you need a partner, but I think you can definitely actually mimic that and pull that off without the multi-$1,000 piece of equipment. So kind of cool. The next thing that they went into was kind of like a balance board training. I would say this is like a fancy Bosu ball. The biggest thing with it is that it had a screen, so you're like playing a game, standing on it, and you're controlling your cursor with your feet. Essentially, was kind of the take that I was getting from that. That one I don't love. I'm not a big Bosu guy or anything like that, or like that type of balance training. I think balance improves when you train balance no matter what the tool is, because that's applying to the SAID principle of specific adaptations that impose demand. So whether you're standing on a Bosu ball, a piece of foam, or just flat on the ground, and your intention is to improve your balance, so you do that 3 days a week for 5 weeks, your balance is going to improve no matter what tool you're using. That's just how the body works, because we're creating a adaptation because we stuck with it. So that's that SAID principle that's really important. So I think that tool, though cool and fun, is not really like necessary, nor is, a Bosu ball where you put a tennis ball on the center of it and you bounce around, you control the tennis ball from one corner to the next corner and all that stuff too. I think it's more entertaining training than it is like intentional growth training. I think it's just like stimulating the mind, which there's some value in that. But if we're just talking about like actual like performance or programming, it's kind of tough to do. Like you can get better numbers, sure, you can do it for longer, but it's definitely a tougher measurement. So I'm just not as big a fan of balance training like that. I think balance training where there's like coordination involved with it, say like a kettlebell single arm swing to, a lunge or something like that, that still includes balance. A walking lunge with weight still includes balance. So it's not fully necessary to have these high-tech tools to do it, but whatever floats your boat. So they said that they're going to work some reaction drills. Now, to me, when I hear a reaction drill, I hear you know, tennis balls being used. I hear like dropping and catching, kind of like actual reflex reaction, or, you know, having to move your foot from one place to the next place, like reactive, why. So like agility, even, you know, skipping, pogos, lateral skaters, you know, that type of stuff is very reactive, very powerful, very useful. Um, what I saw was a virtual game that they were playing, which just reminded me of like Dance Dance Resolution or Revolution from, um, you know, a gaming console where you're like moving around and smacking stuff. So like, I don't know, it was like Xbox 360 or Xbox One came out with some shit like that. But yeah, it was just more technology in games than it was like strength and conditioning, which was kind of interesting. She did say that, you know, the explosive training is important so that, you know, especially in bouldering where you're going to be leaping and jumping sometimes and doing dynos, not only do you need to be explosive and powerful, but you need like that precision with it, because if you're trying to jump to a small hold or your foot is going from one place that is a big hold onto a small hold, you need to be precise. So there's definitely like the coordination and precision that comes with being explosive, that it's not just like you need to like be able to jump as high as possible, but you need to be able to do it in a controlled fashion. So there's definitely a lot of truth to that. I couldn't agree more. That's super important for many sports, but rock climbing especially, and dyno in movements, you know, whether you're on rope or not, super important. At the end of the weight training, I shouldn't say weight training, the training session, they were asking about, you know, weight training. Do you do lunges? Do you do deadlifts? Do you do this? Do you do that? And the answer was no. Um, I kind of snickered a little bit at that part because the reason was not wanting to gain muscle weight. And knowing as a strength and conditioning coach that that's not how strength training works, that's how hypertrophy training works. There's a difference between hypertrophy training and strength training. Strength training is to basically maximize force potential of the muscle, not to gain size in the muscle. So hypertrophy, the intention is to gain muscular size. Strength training is to maximize what you have, essentially. And that's a neuromuscular adaptation that you're trying to create. So to say that they avoid weight training because they don't want to put on muscle is not really a valid reason not to. All I hear when I hear that is a misunderstanding, not only from an athlete, but potentially their coaches about strength training. So I don't love that. I don't agree with that. I think that there's a lot of value in strength training in rock climbing for rock climbing athletes. It's just, it has to be done a specific way and it needs to be done appropriately for the sport. And that's for any sport, of course. So, you know, if you don't want to get bigger, well, that's fine. You don't have to do hypertrophy. And you also, to get bigger and gain, it's not as simple as just like lifting until you're sore and breaking your tissue down. There needs to be an excess amount of calories in the system to allow the body to get bigger. Because if you imagine it, you have a dirt pile and all you're ever doing with that dirt pile is just scooping and moving it around. It's never actually volume wise any bigger. You have to put more dirt on it to create it to be bigger. So at the end of the day, to get bigger muscles, you need caloric surplus in your body to essentially do that. So hypertrophy with caloric surplus, yes, you will get bigger and gain muscle mass. But if you're doing strength training and your caloric intake to caloric outtake is pretty much the same, and you're making sure that you're getting proper nutrients, of course, you don't really have to be too concerned about gaining mass. It's kind of a misunderstanding. So when they're talking about, you know, no weight training because of that, like I said, I don't think that's a really good reason to avoid weight training. I think there's a lot of value that could happen in weight training for rock climbers. She did say before her first Olympic appearance where they had to do speed climbing, bouldering, and sport climbing, she did do some deadlifting for the sake of building up some explosiveness for, or not explosiveness, but strength for the speed climbing, which is not her discipline, but since it was in a preliminary year, they had to do all 3 disciplines. So that was just something they did. So she said that's when she did deadlifts, but that was like a few years ago. So that's not really like a regular part of the train, it sounds like, for her. Um, you know, this is super interesting to kind of look at a different athlete and break it down. Like, I love rock climbing a ton. I think it's something that there's a lot of athletic ability in, and you know, the top climbers in the world are absolutely insane. But it's like any other sport, you know, that 1% of the 1% in that elite category are just phenomenal. So I think that at the end of the day, Janja is a very skilled and also very gifted rock climbing athlete. You know, sometimes people just find their purpose in sport, and it's like she definitely did find that. And it's obvious that her training and what she does works for her because she's so dominant. So though I'm breaking it down from a strength and conditioning coach perspective, and I'd say, you know, like, I would do this different, I didn't like that, I wouldn't do that. I'm also not her coach. I'm also not the one, you know, making her be as phenomenal as she is. But it is food for thought when you look at a top level athlete and kind of see the ins and outs of their training and kind of scratch your head a little bit. Um, so just like I said, food for thought on that end. As far as her work on the wall when she does actually get into the climbing gym, it's absolutely incredible. She's, you know, next level with it, and her coaches are super helpful to her. So I think that's kind of where her bread and butter is a little bit more. And the stuff that is being done with the physio or the trainer is definitely more like supplemental, as it should be. But like I said, I think there's still just a little bit more that could be done on that end. So um, yeah, super fun to break this down. If you like the video, please like, subscribe, share, all that stuff, because it's super helpful to, you know, the page, super helpful to Outlier, and I appreciate it. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.